I grew up believing that Thanksgiving was the one day of the year when everything in my life felt predictable. The house always smelled like roasted turkey and sage. My mother always played soft instrumental hymns in the background, and the streets outside were quiet except for neighbors scraping ice from their driveways. It was the kind of stability that made me feel safe, but the world wasn't going to shift beneath my feet without warning. But the year Emily came to visit, everything felt different before it even began, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I only felt a subtle tension sitting somewhere beneath my ribs, like an unspoken truth waiting for the right moment to surface. Emily and I had been close in college, before my life became defined by callings, Relief Society events, temple schedules, and the constant pressure to be the perfect example of a Latter-day Saint woman. She respected my faith even though she never embraced religion herself, and that was part of what made our friendship feel so grounded. She let me be me, even when I barely understood who that was anymore. When she texted me 2 weeks before Thanksgiving saying she wanted to come visit, I felt something warm and familiar open inside me, like a door I had forgotten existed. She arrived late afternoon, stepping out of her rental car with a suitcase and a smile that made the cold November air feel less biting. I hugged her tightly, realizing how much I'd missed the version of myself that existed when I was around her, the one who didn't measure every word for righteousness, who didn't worry about whether my testimony sounded strong enough, who didn't feel guilty for not being perfect. My husband Derek greeted her with a polite smile, shaking her hand before heading back to his office to finish a report for work. His distance wasn't unusual. Marriage had become something quiet and functional between us, more like a partnership in logistics than a connection of hearts. I used to think something was wrong with me for feeling that way. Lately, I wondered if something was wrong with the whole system we built our lives around. Emily walked into the living room, looking around slowly. "Your home looks exactly like I imagined," she said with a soft laugh. "Warm, organized, peaceful, peaceful." The word echoed in my mind as she spoke it. I always hoped people saw my life that way. I had arranged the framed temple photographs carefully, hung the family proclamation in a dark wood frame, placed my scriptures on the entry table as if they naturally belonged there. Everything looked right. Everything looked consistent. Yet hearing her say it made my stomach twist subtly, because somehow her description didn't match the way I felt inside. We spent the evening talking about work, relationships, aging parents, and the pieces of our 20s we both felt we had lost too quickly. Emily mentioned her mother only once, briefly, when I asked how she'd been holding up since the funeral. There was a flicker in her eyes, a shadow quickly tucked away as she forced a smile and said, "I'm doing okay." Some days are easier than others. I didn't push. I knew grief wasn't something people unwrap easily. I also knew Emily wasn't used to being vulnerable. She carried her pain quietly, like she feared burdening others with it. After dinner, we stood by the window watching the first snowfall of the season. Soft flakes drifted down in slow spirals, landing on the porch light and melting into tiny droplets. Emily hugged her arms around herself. "I always forget how pretty Utah is in the winter." "It's one of my favorite things," I said. "It makes everything feel clean, new." "It does," she agreed. "I want to understand more of your world while I'm here. You talk about the temple sometimes, and I've seen it online, but I never really understood what it meant." There was no judgment in her voice, only curiosity. Honest, open curiosity. I hesitated before answering. "There's actually an open house right now for the renovated temple in the next city over. Anyone can go. If you want, I could take you tomorrow." Her face lit up with genuine interest. "Really? I'd love that." And just like that, something shifted. Not in a dramatic way, more like a small internal click, a gentle turning of gears. The kind of shift you don't fully understand until much later when the consequences have settled into place. The next morning, the world outside was wrapped in a thin blanket of white. We left early, driving through neighborhoods lined with bare trees and Christmas lights already strung along rooftops. The sky was pale blue, almost translucent, like winter was breathing quietly over the city. Emily leaned forward when the temple finally came into view. "Oh my gosh," she whispered. "It's beautiful." "It is," I said, though I felt something heavier beneath the pride in my voice. A faint uneasiness I couldn't name. She stared at the building the way people stare at monuments or cathedrals, softened, reverent, curious. "It looks like something out of a movie. Like it doesn't belong to the real world." "A lot of people feel that way," I replied. "It's meant to feel separate, holy." Inside the visitor tent, volunteers handed out plastic booties to slip over our shoes. Families bundled in puffy coats chatted quietly. Missionaries greeted people with bright smiles, and children held their parents' hands with wide, curious eyes. Emily watched everything with the same intensity she had in college when she was studying for exams, absorbing every detail like it mattered. When our group was called, we followed a guide through the doors and into the temple. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. It was quieter, warmer, almost too still. Emily slowed her steps, taking in the gleaming floors, these ornate chandeliers, the paintings of Christ and scenes from Scripture. Her face softened, her eyes wide with admiration. "This is incredible," she whispered. I smiled, feeling a spark of pride. But beneath that spark lay something else, something that felt like the first small crack in a sheet of ice. We moved through the endowment rooms, the bride's dressing area, and then into the sealing room. Emily stood silently, her gaze traveling from the mirrored walls to the altar. She touched my arm gently. "You got married in a room like this?" "Yes." "Did it feel sacred?" she asked softly. I paused longer than I intended. "At the time, yes." She looked at me like she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. I was grateful for that. I wasn't ready to unpack the truth, not about my marriage, and not about the weight of expectations I had carried for so long. When we entered the next hallway, she whispered, "Everything is so quiet. Like it's suspended in time." "That's the idea," I said with a soft laugh. But I felt the strangeness too, the way silence here felt rehearsed, practiced, almost mandatory. The kind of silence where you are expected to be moved, whether you genuinely are or not. Then we turned the corner into the baptismal font room. The temperature in the air seemed to shift. The room was brighter than the others, the water shimmering under soft lights. 12 massive oxen carved from stone stood beneath the font, their backs supporting the round basin. Emily froze, completely, her breath stilled, her shoulders tightened, and her eyes locked onto the water like it held something dangerous. The guide, Sister Langford, smiled warmly. "This is where we perform baptisms for the dead. Members stand as proxies for those who passed away without receiving baptism. It gives them the opportunity to—" "Wait," Emily whispered sharply. "Baptisms for the dead?" The guide nodded. "Yes, it is one of the most beautiful works we do in the temple." Emily's hands began to shake. She took a step backward, her face paling in seconds. I reached for her. "Emily, hey, it's okay. It's symbolic. It's meant to be loving." But she didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes stayed locked on that water, her expression tightening, her breathing quickening to short, shallow bursts. The guide kept speaking, but Emily couldn't hear a word of it. Her voice broke when she finally spoke again. "My mom died 2 years ago." The guide nodded kindly, unaware of the storm brewing beneath Emily's skin. Emily continued, her voice trembling. "She didn't believe in religion. At all. And she told me right before she died that she didn't want anyone performing rituals on her behalf. She made me promise." She made me promise." Tears welled in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around herself, like she was holding her heart together. "Are you telling me," she whispered, "that someone could take her name and baptize her after death, without my permission?" The room fell silent. Even the guide seemed momentarily speechless. I felt something inside me collapse not because of doctrine, but because of her pain. The rawness of her grief made the air feel colder, heavier. I whispered, "I didn't know it would hurt you like this." Emily shook her head violently. "It's not just hurt. It feels like someone reached into something sacred to me. Something personal. And suddenly, I wasn't standing in a temple anymore. I was standing at the intersection of two worlds, my faith and my friendship, and both felt impossibly fragile." Emily turned away, tears falling, and walked out of the room. I hesitated only a second before following her, feeling my chest tighten with each step. I didn't know it then, but that moment would become the catalyst for a change I had avoided for years. That was the moment everything I believed began to shift. When I caught up with Emily in the parking lot, she was standing near the car, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if the November air had suddenly become unbearable. The snow was still falling, soft and relentless, gathering on the hoods of cars and dusting her dark hair. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her breathe in short, uneven bursts, trying to find the right words and coming up empty. "Emily," I said softly. "Hey." She didn't look at me right away. Her eyes were fixed on some distant point beyond the rows of vehicles, like she was trying to hold on to something only she could see. When she finally turned, her expression was a mix of fear, anger, and something deeper, something like betrayal. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I didn't realize it would feel like that for you." She shook her head, her voice cracking. "I didn't either. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was just going to see a pretty building and learn about your faith. I wasn't expecting." She swallowed, her hands trembling. "I wasn't expecting that." I took a tentative step closer. "I grew up seeing baptisms for the dead as this beautiful, loving thing. We were always told it was about giving people a choice, about helping them. I hesitated. I never thought about what it might feel like for someone whose loved one didn't want anything to do with religion." Her eyes filled again. "My mom was very clear. She didn't want rituals. She didn't want anyone speaking for her after she was gone. She made me promise not to let anyone twist her memory into something she wouldn't recognize." Her voice dropped to a whisper. I feel like I broke that promise just by stepping into that room. The words sank into me slowly, like ink spreading through water. I had heard so many lessons about the temple, about ordinances, about the salvation of the dead. But I had never heard it described the way she just had, as a possible violation, as something that could feel like an intrusion instead of a gift. "I didn't know," I said again, quieter this time. It felt like such a small thing to say, but it was the only honest thing I had. "I honestly didn't know it could feel like that." Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, the skin of her knuckles red from the cold. "I know you didn't do it to hurt me. I know you're not that kind of person, but hearing that, standing in that room, it felt like someone walked over my mother's memory without asking. And I panicked. There was a rhythm to her pain, a pattern I recognized even if I had never named it before. Grief doesn't vanish just because time passes. It lingers beneath the surface, waiting for something to stir it up again. This was that moment for her, and now I was part of it. "Can we just go?" she whispered. "I don't want to be here anymore." "Yeah," I said immediately. "Of course. Let's go." The walk back to the car felt longer than it should have. My boots crunched on the snow while my mind replayed the guy's words in the baptismal room. Then Emily's reaction. Then all the times I had participated in ordinances for people whose names I had read off a little card and never actually known. I had always trusted the narrative given to me, that this was love, that this was service, that this was a privilege. Now I was being forced to see that same practice from another angle, and the contrast between the two perspectives made something inside me ache. We got into the car and shut the doors, shutting out the cold, but not the tension. The silence between us settled in thick layers. I turned on the heater and watched our breath slowly fade from the air. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The temple loomed in the rearview mirror, bright and still and perfect against the gray sky. "I'm not mad at you," Emily said eventually, her voice softer. "I need you to know that." "I know you didn't invite me here to hurt me." I stared at the steering wheel. "I feel like I did anyway," she shook her head. "No, what happened in there? It wasn't about you personally. It was about everything I've been holding on to since my mom died. It just got triggered in that room." That word triggered felt clinical compared to what I had seen in her eyes. It hadn't just been a reaction. It had been a rupture. "I always thought," I began slowly, "that if people on the outside understood what we did in the temple, they would feel grateful. That they would see it as this incredible gift we were giving their ancestors. We were taught that they would, at least." I let out a humorless laugh. "I don't think I ever really imagined that someone could see it as anything else." Emily tilted her head slightly, studying me. "And what do you think now?" I watched a snowflake slide slowly down the windshield, leaving a thin wet trail. "I think I was only looking at it from inside the system. And from inside, it felt obvious and right. But when I saw your face, it was like someone opened a window and let in air I didn't know I was missing. Suddenly I could see it from the outside too. And from out there," I swallowed. "From out there, it looks very different." She nodded slowly, like she was giving me space to process in real time. "That makes sense." I backed the car out of the space and started driving, my hands tighter on the wheel than they needed to be. For a while, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the soft swish of the wipers. Snowflakes streaked across the glass, blurring the road and the world beyond it. Halfway down the highway, Emily shifted in her seat. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if it makes you uncomfortable." "Ask," I said, even though my chest tightened. "Do you believe everything your church teaches?" she asked quietly. Not in the automatic way. Not in the "I know the church is true" testimony way. I mean, in your own heart. The question landed heavier than I expected. It felt like it dropped straight into the center of me, right where all my unspoken doubts and buried questions lived. "I used to think I did," I said finally. "For a long time, I thought that was what faith meant, saying yes to everything, no matter what. Pushing doubts away before they could even form a sentence. And now?" She pressed gently. "Now," that word hung between us like a fragile thread. "Now I'm not sure what I believe," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "There are things that still mean a lot to me. Things I still want to hold on to. But there are also parts that feel heavier than they used to. Like I've been carrying them more out of fear than out of conviction." "Fear of what?" she asked. I took a deep breath. Fear of being wrong. Fear of disappointing my family. Fear of losing everything I've built my identity around. My marriage, my community. My sense of being a good person. Emily was quiet for a few seconds. "That's a lot to carry," she said eventually. "No wonder you feel heavy." I let out a short laugh that sounded more like a sigh. I didn't fully realize how heavy until now. She looked out her window for a moment, watching the fields and houses blur by. "I'm not saying this to attack your faith," she said. "But I don't think faith should feel like a cage. It should feel like something that makes you more yourself, not less." Her words sank in deep. I had heard people say things like that before, in abstract ways, usually in self-help books or testimonies about personal revelation. But hearing it from someone who had no interest in converting me, no agenda, no stake in my religious image, made it feel different. Truer. Cleaner. "You know what's strange?" I said slowly. "My whole life I've been taught that people outside the church are in a kind of darkness. That they don't have the fullness of truth, so they're missing something. But sitting here, Listening to you talk about your boundaries and your mother's wishes and your grief, I don't see darkness. I just see someone being honest. Emily's lips curved in a sad smile. Honesty was kind of my mom's religion, she said. She didn't believe in heaven or hell, but she believed in telling the truth, even when it was messy. She said it was the only way to really know yourself. I thought about that for a long moment. In my world, honesty was valued too, but only within certain boundaries. You could bear your testimony as long as it supported the narrative. You could share doubts, but only if they ended with, "And that's why I know the church is true." We were encouraged to be open, but not too open. Questioning too loudly was like stepping off a path that had been carefully laid out for us. Sometimes I don't feel like I even know myself, I admitted. I know who I'm supposed to be. I know the roles I'm supposed to fill. I can recite the script, but deep down, if you ask me what I really, truly believe, I don't know if I could answer with certainty. Emily didn't rush to respond. She let the silence sit for a few seconds, giving it room to breathe. Maybe that's where you start, she finally said, not with what you're supposed to believe. With what you actually feel, even if it's uncomfortable. The thought scared me, but it also felt weirdly right. For years, I had followed a rhythm that was laid out for me: baptism, young women's, seminary, temple marriage, callings. I had moved along that path because that's what everyone did, and I wanted to be good, to be worthy, to be accepted. Now, sitting in a car driving down a snowy Utah highway, I realized that rhythm might not be the same as peace. When we pulled into the driveway, Emily unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't reach for the door handle. Instead, she turned to me and said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For listening," she answered. "For not shutting down. You could have told me I was being dramatic, or that I just didn't understand your faith. But you didn't. That means a lot to me. I care about you," I said simply. "And I care about how this affects you. I can't pretend I didn't see your face in that room. I can't go back to how things were before that." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's a good thing." We stepped out of the car and walked inside, stomping the snow off our boots by the door. The house felt oddly small after the vast ornate halls of the temple. It also felt more real. The kitchen counter dusted with flour from the pie I'd rushed to finish that morning. Derek's mug still in the sink, a stray sock near the couch where he must have kicked it off the night before. Regular life. Ordinary mess. Derek poked his head out of his office doorway. "Hey, you guys are back. How was it?" I froze. Emily looked at me, her expression unreadable for a second, then cleared her throat and said, "It was intense, beautiful in some ways. A lot to take in." Derek nodded, accepting that without follow-up. "Well, I'm glad you got to see it. Dinner in a couple of hours." "Yeah," I said. "That's fine." He disappeared back into his office, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Emily and I looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between us. There were some things I wasn't ready to share with Derek yet. Not because he didn't deserve to know, but because I didn't know how to say them out loud without unraveling more of my life than I was prepared to face in that moment. That evening, we made mashed potatoes together in the kitchen. Emily in charge of seasoning because she always had better instincts for flavor than I did. We laughed at small things, reminisced about our college apartment, talked about the time our landlord's dog ate an entire bag of our groceries. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Underneath, there was a new tension, but it wasn't hostile. It was more like a thin line pulling my inner world in a direction I hadn't allowed it to go before. After dinner, we sat on the couch with blankets over our legs while Derek watched a game in the other room. Emily scrolled through old photos of her mom on her phone. I caught glimpses of them together: birthdays, backyard barbecues, hospital visits with forced smiles. "She was stubborn," Emily said, her eyes soft. "She always said, I lived my life on my terms, and I'll leave it on my terms too. That's why the idea of someone doing something to her name after she died feels so wrong, like it goes against who she was. I get it, I said. And I did. On a level that surprised me. I thought of all the times I had done family history work, feeling proud when I submitted names, never once imagining that the people behind those names might have had strong ideas about what they did or didn't want after death. I had only ever seen it through the lens I'd been given that we were rescuing them, giving them something they lacked. I had never considered that there might be stories like Emily's behind some of those names, promises like the one she had made to her mother. Later that night, long after Derek had gone to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, the warmth from the heater humming softly through the vents. My thoughts replayed the entire day like a movie looped on repeat. Emily's face in the baptismal font room, her trembling voice in the parking lot, the way she held her phone when she talked about her mother. All the questions I had pushed aside for years began rising again, this time with more force, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Why did we assume our way was always the loving way? Why did the churches need to perform ordinances override a family's wishes? Why had I never asked myself these questions before? Outside, snow tapped gently against the window. There was a strange comfort in its steady rhythm. It reminded me that nothing stays still forever. Not seasons, not beliefs, not the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep. I wrapped myself in a blanket and stepped into the hallway, intending to get a glass of water. As I passed the guest room, I noticed a thin line of light beneath the door. It was open just a crack, enough for me to see Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slightly hunched, her phone in her hands. She was looking at a picture of her mom, the same one I'd seen earlier. Her thumb brushed over the screen like she wanted to touch her mother's face and couldn't. I knocked gently on the door frame. "Hey," I whispered. "You're still awake?" She looked up, not startled, just tired. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." "You?" "Same." I stepped into the room and sat beside her on the bed. The lamplight made everything feel quieter, more intimate. She turned the phone so I could see the photo. Her mom was sitting on a hospital bed, her smile surprisingly bright, her hair wrapped in a colorful scarf. Emily was next to her, leaning in, their foreheads almost touching. "She looks kind," I said. "She was," Emily answered. "She was also blunt as hell. She once told a priest to his face that she didn't need a man in a robe to talk to God." A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. He did not appreciate that. I laughed softly, imagining the scene. "I don't think most of the men in my ward would handle that well either." "She wasn't trying to be rude," Emily continued. "She just hated the idea of someone speaking for her. About her, over her, especially spiritually. She believed that if there was anything after death, she would figure it out on her own." The weight of that statement settled between us. "That's why the baptism thing hit so hard," she said. "It wasn't just some random ritual. It felt like someone taking away her voice, even after she's gone." I nodded slowly. "I understand now. More than I did this morning. Honestly, I'm grateful you reacted the way you did." She gave me a surprised look. "You are?" "Yeah," I said. "Because if you hadn't, I might have gone my whole life without really questioning it. I would have kept doing what I was taught, never seeing how it might actually feel to someone like you. Or like your mom." She studied me for a moment. "So what are you going to do with that?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I don't think I can go back to pretending I'm not bothered. I think this is a turning point. Or at least the start of one." Emily rested her head on my shoulder, and we sat in silence for a while. The whole house felt suspended in a kind of stillness that somehow wasn't empty. It felt like standing at the edge of something, not sure whether you were about to step forward or step back. Eventually, she said, "Whatever you decide, I just want you to be honest with yourself. You deserve that." Her words didn't feel like advice. They felt like a quiet invitation. I thought about all the people who might hear this story one day, people who had gone through their own quiet turning points, their own collisions between belief and love. I wondered how many of them were still stuck in that in-between place, afraid to move in any direction. There was a strange sense of comfort in knowing I wouldn't be alone in this. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt that tension, that moment when your heart and your beliefs feel out of sync, I hope you know you're not broken for feeling it. You're just paying attention. Emily and I eventually lay down, the lamp still on, neither of us really asleep but resting anyway. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, I realized that sometimes life doesn't change in grand revelations or dramatic exits. Sometimes it shifts quietly in guest rooms at 3 in the morning, with two women sitting on the edge of a bed, finally telling the truth. And once that truth has been spoken, there's no real way to go back. Only forward, even if you don't yet know what forward looks like. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the living room curtains in soft golden stripes, turning the melted snow on the windows into tiny glowing rivers. Emily was already awake when I came downstairs. She was sitting cross-legged on the rug near the heater vent, wrapped in the gray blanket from the couch, hands curled around a mug of coffee. She looked peaceful now, calmer than the night before, but there was still a quiet heaviness in her eyes. "Morning," I said softly. She smiled. "Hey." I made myself some herbal tea and sat across from her on the floor. For a moment, neither of us said anything. There was a comfortable silence between us, one built on the understanding that we were standing in the aftermath of something important, something that had cracked open both of us in different ways. "I was thinking about yesterday," she said finally. "And about what you said in the car, about fear." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." She took a sip of her coffee, holding the mug against her lips, as if the warmth steadied her. "I don't want you to feel like you have to change everything because of me. That's not what this is." "I know," I said, "but it's not really about you." "Not anymore. Yesterday didn't create my doubts. It revealed them." She lowered the mug. "Revealed?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Like they were cracks under the surface I kept trying to ignore. But seeing your reaction, seeing how deeply it affected you, made me realize I can't keep pretending I'm okay with everything." Emily studied my face. "How long have you been feeling like this?" I let out a long breath. "A long time," I admitted. But I didn't have a reason to face it before. I didn't have a moment that forced me to stop and really look at it. She nodded. "And now you do. And now I do," I repeated. Emily stared into her cup for a moment, then asked carefully, "Are you afraid of what it means? To start questioning things?" I swallowed. "Yeah, terrified actually." She didn't respond with platitudes or reassurances. She just let the truth hang there, because sometimes that's what truth needs, space to exist without being dressed up or smoothed over. After a moment, she said, "You know, my mom used to say that life has a way of putting things in front of us over and over until we finally deal with them. She called it life's way of nudging." She smiled faintly. "Subtle like a brick to the face." I laughed. "Sounds accurate." She believed that when something keeps showing up, an idea, a fear, a question, it's because it's trying to take you somewhere you're supposed to go. Her words settled inside me like a quiet echo of thoughts I had been having for months but never dared to articulate. "I think you're right," I said. "And I think I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it." Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone in it." That simple sentence meant more than she realized. Later that afternoon, after Thanksgiving leftovers and a long walk in the cold air, Emily asked if she could light a candle for her mother. We placed it on the windowsill, the tiny flame flickering against the winter light, casting a warm glow across the room. She stood quietly, eyes closed for a moment, lips moving in a whisper I couldn't hear. It didn't matter what she said. What mattered was the tenderness in the gesture, the sincerity in the way she held her hands, the softness in her face. Watching her, I felt something subtle shift inside me again. Not a dramatic break, not a sudden revelation, just a gentle release, like an internal knot slowly loosening. When she opened her eyes, she caught me watching her. "What?" she asked with a small smile. "Nothing," I said. "It was just beautiful. It's just something she and I used to do," she said. Whenever things felt complicated, she wasn't religious, but she believed in connection, I guess. She believed people left impressions on the world long after they were gone. She sounds wise. She was, Emily said, her expression softening. She really was. We sat down on the couch again, both of us wrapped in blankets, watching the candles' flame dance in the reflection of the window. The silence was warm this time, not heavy. After a few minutes, Emily said quietly, "What are you thinking about right now?" I stared at the candle for a moment before answering. That maybe faith isn't supposed to feel rigid, or one-sized, or like something that demands you fit into it, instead of fitting itself around your life. That sounds honest, she said gently. And real. It's what I feel, I said. For the first time, I'm actually letting myself feel it. She nodded as if she understood, and I think she did. That evening, Emily packed her suitcase. Her flight was the next morning, early. The house felt heavier as she folded her sweaters and zipped her toiletries bag, like her presence had created a space I didn't want to lose yet. "I don't want you to go," I admitted. She smiled softly. "I know. But I'm only a call away." "Thank you," I said. "For coming, for being honest, for everything." She pulled me into a hug. "Thank you for letting me in. Not just into your home, into your real thoughts, into the messy stuff. That's what friendship is." When she left the next day, the house felt quiet in a way I hadn't expected. I sat on the couch alone for a long time, watching the frost on the window melt as the sun rose. Derek was still asleep upstairs. The silence was thick, but not suffocating, more like the calm before a new realization. I walked slowly through the house, running my fingers along the framed temple pictures on the wall. They looked different now, not wrong, not hollow, just different. Like symbols that had once carried unquestioned meaning but now invited contemplation. My scriptures felt heavier when I picked them up. Not in a burdensome way, more like they were inviting me to reconsider the weight I had given them. For the first time in years, I didn't feel compelled to rehearse my beliefs to myself to make them feel true. I let the questions breathe. What if faith didn't have to be certainty? What if it could be exploration? What if obedience wasn't the only form of devotion? What if honesty with myself was a kind of reverence too? These thoughts weren't rebellious. They weren't angry. They felt natural, like a realignment. Like the internal compass that had been spinning finally pointed somewhere that felt like mine. I went to the kitchen, made myself tea, and sat at the table where Emily and I had talked just hours earlier. The winter light cast long shadows across the floor, quiet and soft. Something in that stillness felt like a message of life moving in patterns, revealing what needed to be seen when the time was right. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. My fingers hesitated for a moment before typing. "Thank you. For yesterday, for everything. I'm still thinking about it." "In a good way." I hit send. Her reply came almost instantly. "Always." I sat back in my chair, letting her words settle into me. Always. It felt like an anchor in a moment when everything else felt uncertain. Then, surprisingly, real peace washed over me. Not the kind that came from performing the right rituals or saying the right words. Not the kind that came from fitting into a mold or checking off spiritual boxes. It was quieter, deeper, more honest. A kind of peace that grows when you stop fighting what your heart has been trying to tell you. A thought rose gently in my mind, not loud or dramatic, just a soft realization. Maybe faith isn't about clinging to what you were taught. Maybe it's about allowing yourself to grow into what feels true. Life had shown me that yesterday. Through Emily's pain. Through the questions I couldn't hide from anymore. Through the contrast between what I wanted to believe and what I actually felt. And now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid to listen. Even if the path ahead was uncertain. Even if people wouldn't understand. Even if I wasn't sure where it would lead. All I knew was this. Truth doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for honesty. And honesty, however uncomfortable, was the first real prayer I had offered in years. As I stood and walked to the window, watching the snow fall in gentle rhythmic flakes, I realized something profound in its simplicity. Everything in life moves in patterns, beliefs, friendships, identity, seasons, emotions, understanding. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one conversation, one room, one reflection for the rhythm to shift and reveal a new direction. Emily had been that moment for me. And now, whether I was ready or not, my life had quietly turned. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt your beliefs tremble under the weight of a real human moment, you're not alone. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself question. Let yourself grow. Life has a way of guiding us where we need to go, even when the path is uncomfortable. And sometimes, the light that shows us the way doesn't come from certainty. It comes from honesty,